We're here. So hi, everybody. I'm Jules from the Discord server, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server. And today, Alexandra, Zachary, and I are going to be having a Dialogos. And just wanted to give a brief introduction of Alexandra, who I've only known maybe a month, might be more, probably more. And Alexandra's just someone I really like. We connected very early when she came onto the server, and she's tremendously interesting, a musician, an ayahuasca, not saying that right.
No.
Buddhist meditator, among many other things, but just a tremendously interesting, and I was thinking about you this morning, a joyful person.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's such a lovely thing to step into this community because, I've met such open and genuine humans here, and my previous experiences on cyberspace forums have been far less enjoyable, let's say. So yeah, in this time we're in of electronic communication, then this is certainly as good as it gets, I think. So yeah, thanks,
That's
Jules.
well said. Yeah, no, I agree. It's well said. I just find you very interesting. You're one of those people who, I don't know. I feel like I could keep sort of digging into what you're doing for a long time and still be finding out interesting things. And is it all right with you if we sort of talk a little bit about the
Sure.
things you
Yeah.
do? I mean,
Yeah.
some
I'm a
maybe you
jack
want
of
to.
all trades, master of none, or maybe master of one or two, maybe.
Did you want to
But
like talk about yourself a bit, or do you want me to ask questions?
ah, so the back of the cornflakes box biography.
Yeah.
Started off life learning music age 3 and was very obsessive compulsive with music. Went to a music school. Um, the career path seemed to be either towards concert pianist or orchestral violinist. Um, but by the time I was 14 and existential, I kind of had been interested in all sorts of other things, particularly consciousness and altered states and shamanism and a variety of exploratory activities ensued. And then my first attempt at a degree was music performance, and I ran off with a goth guitarist, and that ended my classical music career somewhat. Um, Became a mother very young, which was probably the most extraordinary learning experience of my life, and continues to be now that he's an adult. Um, and during the first years of motherhood, I went and studied naturopathy because my other sort of set of um, obsessions have been surrounding plants and plant medicine and connection to nature and environmental activism and that sort of thing. So, musician, naturopath, interested in all sorts of different complementary medicines and various self-exploratory techniques. Um,
Mm.
then my son finished high school and I had some money for the first time for myself. And so I went overseas and left Australia for the first time, and I went to South America, where in Ecuador I met curandero, the indigenous healer, and he said to me, "Oh, your teacher's waiting for you in Peru. Go and learn the plant medicines in Peru." And I went, "Okay." So I came back to Australia, saved up some more money, and then went to Peru, and that's where I met my teacher, my Runa indigenous teacher,
Mm.
um, and I started training as an ayahuasquera and working with the various plant medicines of the Amazon and the psychedelic medicines there. And then I moved there and lived there for several years, and then COVID happened. And my work stopped, my income stopped, my work visa stopped, and my family were desperately worried and begging me to find a way to come back to Australia, and so I did. Um, and so I was sitting in hotel quarantine, um, stuck in a very strange room, going from the Amazon jungle into this luxury prison cell in Sydney, and um, and became a YouTube junkie at that point, and binge watched the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series of Viveki's, and was very, very inspired by that. And then enrolled in a degree in psychology, so with a view to being a clinical psychologist who can work with psychedelics in a more Western framework eventually. So there you go. That's my whole story.
So
What about you, Jules?
well, I wanted to say, like, before we do that, because really we're going to be talking about a certain, I don't know, component of how we do spiritual things. I know we're going to get there, and I'll hand over to you. Okay. But one thing I wanted to bring up really quickly is some of the people I'm interested in, like Marshall McLuhan. Do you remember Marshall McLuhan?
Yep, medium. The medium. Yep.
Yeah, media is the message. And, well, he said something interesting about artists. Do you remember this thing that he said about artists, and how artists are always the first ones to show us how to relate to new media environments? I think I get that vibe from you, that when I was listening to you talking about in your younger days, you're 14 and you're already interested in consciousness. Consciousness is the du jour topic for the last 3 years or so, probably a bit longer in higher circles, but you were connecting to that at a really young age. And things like shamanism, which I don't know much about outside of talking to Capello and yourself, and John has some very interesting things to say about it. And it just makes me wonder, like, maybe that's the thing I connect to you about, is this kind of artistic spirit that you have. Sorry, that's not a super sciencey way to put it, but did you resonate with anything like that you sort of find yourself very much at the avant-garde of things and doing things which seem a little bit outside?
Well, one way of describing it would be that because my interests have always been incredibly broad, I've been autodidactic in many areas that I probably could have pursued as an academic career, and chose not to for just practical reasons, or I had to put food on the table and teach music and do my naturopathy to raise my son. So that. But the other thing that struck me when you just said that was, I'm very much interested in direct experience, and that's what interests me about what I want to ask about your personal experience. And although I enjoy sitting in the propositional realm, it's something I have a lot of fun with. I'm much more at home in the participatory.
Yes.
And I love the observing the way that it all interacts and connects. Because if you just have an intellectual concept without an experiential set of insights, it's hollow somehow to me. But then also, if you just have the experiential phenomenological things happening without an intellectual framework, it's also destabilizing.
So I couldn't agree with you more. And I am going to hand over to you in terms of guiding that question, but I couldn't uh, go on without reverting back to music, because both of us like music.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I was sort of coming up, and this was in the middle 1980s into the middle 1990s, there was sort of a movement in pop music where, as you were saying before, being an autodidact was really possible. A kid can go down to the news agency and buy like Guitar Magazine, and it will have tablature showing you how to play this amazing legato style guitar music and so on. And you don't really have to be able to sight read. And obviously this has sort of expanded in a big way to YouTube and Instagram and all of this sort of stuff. But one of the interesting lessons for me was, even though I grew up, I grew up singing in a cathedral choir, one of the things we were taught, and this was every day of the week except for Saturday, was sight reading and pitch training, ear training, which, as you know from our meditation session the other day, I'm very rusty at.
Comes back quick.
Yeah. But the thing about it that I wanted to sort of bring up was how a lot of the really amazing technical players in the 70s through the 80s through the 90s, and you see a guy like Rick Beato now talking about this kind of thing, did not know how to read music, were doing it very much not just by ear but by feeling, was a really big kind of aspect to it. And that really struck me, going from the kind of very rigid experience of music, which I don't know if you feel this too, but I certainly see it as a very spiritual thing, music. And if you're locked into that propositional way of doing music, you follow the buzz and you follow the dynamics, you know, pianissimo, triple forte. Yeah. It's proscribed. And I just remember sort of wanting to get away from that and feeling very constrained about it. Is that where it sort of started for you in a similar way?
Well, I had extremely rigorous training, and to the exclusion of a lot of other things in my childhood. But it meant that I really knew the flow state from very early.
Right.
And I think that when you have mastered a certain technical level or a level of skill and understanding, then it frees you up. I mean, John mentions jazz. And although I did in fact study jazz for a couple of years in high school, but which was extremely rigorous training, actually. But I find I can master, say, a Bach prelude and fugue. Master, to my level of mastery, and then I can play it and be zoom straight into that flow state. But my greatest joy is improvising, and that links into the shamanic, because the ayahuasca ceremonies are entirely musical. And in fact, when you study each plant, the plant can give you a song. The whole worldview of the Amazon traditions is that everything fundamentally is music, which just resonates for me utterly. And
that's beautiful. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so when you work with the plant to learn it from the inside out, then often it will give you a song, and whether that's just somehow triggering your own creativity, but there's kind of a different flavor to the
Mm.
music that comes. Like you just wake up one morning and there's a tune and it's round and round and round and round, ferociously stuck in your head, and it stays there and it doesn't go away for days and days and days. And to me, that's entirely different experience to, say, free improvisation or an earworm that just from
Mm.
an external source that
Mhm.
gets stuck, like an ABBA song or something, and you're like, ah, get this song out of my head, you know.
Yeah.
And then when you're in ceremony with the psychedelics, the shamanic practice is to sing, to invoke the spirit of that plant for healing of the people in front of you. You know, it's all based on music, really. Um, yeah,
Gosh, it's so rich what you're saying. I mean, firstly, I have to sort of go back to where we started, which is one of the kind of catch cries of these kind of pop musicians who were really kind of into what they were doing in the 80s. I think of groups like Toto, who I
yeah,
really like, serious, amazing musicians, kind of at the center of everything that was on the radio, including the Thriller album by Michael Jackson. Is what they would always say. And I did a bit of a time at a jazz college too. It wasn't a happy experience, but that's beside the point. You got to know the rules to break the rules,
yeah, yeah,
which is, getting into that flow state. And it sort of sounds to me like, unless you've got that kind of set of constraints to begin with, unless you've got that discipline, you cannot actually progress into the flow state. It sort of seems to me.
yeah.
Or maybe
Well,
you can. I don't know.
some research needs to happen here, obviously. um, it just brought to my mind people like Slash from Guns N' Roses,
Yeah.
right? Who is touted as technically one of the world's greatest guitarists, right? He
Mhm.
went off as a young man and lived on the streets in Barcelona and hanging out in Spain with and pestering the old flamenco guys, and he studied with them,
Okay.
you know. So um our
Mm.
our kind of didacticism or scholasticism, or I don't know what's the right word, but our
Propositionality.
yeah, but also like the concept of education that the West has formed is so limiting, really, because
Mm.
you can just go and sit with an old Aboriginal auntie under a tree and in silence and just learn, you know, and you can sit on the streets of Barcelona with an old flamenco guy and master something that way, or you know, the idea of education as limit. And I went to the Amazon with that kind of sort of framework somehow, you know. Oh, I'll meet the teacher and the teacher will take me through steps and I can sort of tick the boxes of all the plants I'm learning and what they're for, and you know, the, and it's not at all like, you know, I get to the jungle with Gume and he's like, well, you think I'm the teacher. God's the teacher. The plants are the teacher. I'm not your teacher. I'm just
Right.
here to hang out with you. You know, it's like I'm so grateful for the intensely structured education that I've received and still receive. You know,
Mm.
I'm a student right now,
Mm.
um, categorically, and uh, and and there is an absolutely marvelous um, place you can get with that structure and mentorship and um, mental discipline, you know, to do things in an academic framework, to do things in a structured
Mm.
way.
Mm.
But that's not the only way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sort of conscious that you started off this dialogue and I'm asking a lot of questions. So I don't know if
Uh,
we want to turn it back over to you. Of course, I can respond to what you're saying, but did you want
sure.
to? Yeah.
Well, I'm, from what I've just said, overall, I'm clearly interested in direct experience
Yes. Yeah.
and the meaning making that people find
Mm.
um, in practices. One thing I left out of my little bio was that, I was suicidally depressed um, as a later teenager and desperately looking for a structure, in fact, um,
Mm.
to explain and cushion the experiential stuff.
Mm.
And I
Yes.
found Buddhism.
Yeah.
Um, Having sort of stuck my nose into many different things, and finally I ended up with Theravadan Buddhism and a very wonderful teacher here in Australia, and those have been my main practices, sort of underneath everything else that I've explored, and I think that that framework has supported my investigations into shamanic practices and into other, things, dance practices, or various
Mm.
um, explorations. And what I'm really interested, because you and I have meditated together now,
Yeah.
uh, and you've brought up how different it is for you when as a Christian you're in a prayer state,
Yeah.
and because you have such um, a balanced, analytical, but sensitive and thoughtful self. I'm really interested
Thank you.
to hear what your direct experience of prayer is like.
Well, first of all, thank you. I mean, it's a warm feeling to have someone actually interested and to show sort of a sincerity about that. And I just want you to know I really appreciate that. Um, what is that direct experience of prayer like? Am I getting the question right?
Yeah, I mean, would you be able to describe the practice sort of per se,
Hmm.
and then sort of let's go into the
Yeah.
feelings and the experience?
So, okay. I, I think it's appropriate to sort of hook into your teenage years and my teenage years at that point, Alexandra. So I had an interesting period between sort of 15 and 21, which is where I made I would just say like a serious vow to follow Jesus as best as I can, which, I'm not a super pious person, but, that's my direction. But, family problems, let's just say that, which were very disruptive, confusing, upsetting, and heartbreaking, Uh, and I'd come from that chrysalis of the High Anglican Church. So you've been to Melbourne, St. Paul's Cathedral. That was the chrysalis for me in the midst of that furore of kind of difficulties at home, which I'm understating severely by saying that. The impact on me was profoundly existentially painful.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the only way to put it. I think you could relate.
yeah,
And I suppose when you sort of adumbrated the balance between sort of a bit of analytical and a bit of sensitive and that kind of tension, John calls it that tonos, right? That must be the Greek word. what I noticed, Alexandra, when I was I was a choir boy. I sang in the choir. And so at that age, when you're having experiences of song,
Yeah.
that is profoundly impacting. I knew I would end up telling you this, but something happened to me when I was singing the Miserere by Allegri.
I just got goosebumps head to toe. The mention of that piece of music, just
You know what I'm saying? Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm having the same feeling. So when the soprano or whatever it is hits that high note,
Yeah.
there's something, well, it's profoundly moving even as I talk about it.
It's that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's elevating. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
In any case, I was ensconced in those kinds of experiences, and contrasting, there's sort of a study of contrast, because what was going on at home was very unstable. Then, having these experiences in a tradition which is so, rooted in many of these kind of Western traditions, which are the core of what we do, and then spiritualizing it in song, and I'm learning a bit of German as I'm doing it, a bit of Italian. It's all of these massive swirl of important formative experiences. But the interesting part was stepping out of St. Paul's Cathedral in let's say, the mid 80s or something like that, and coming out of a cathedral that can seat 2,000. And in that tradition, there's something called evensong, as you know, which is 5 p.m. every day. People can come, they can listen to the choir, they can do what they want. There's maybe 3 people. And I noticed there's this huge effort going towards it, this massive amount of beauty, and people aren't there. And then you walk outside and you look at McDonald's and
Right.
the busyness of the street, and this is where things are happening, and going back to the study of contrasts.
Right.
But, at the same time, I was learning, not theology per se, but, you're hearing the Bible read every day, and you're forming a picture of Christianity. At the same time, you're interacting with 10-year-olds and being stupid and chewing gum, and it's an interesting swirl. But one thing I noticed is that I had a correlation that being a Christian meant being a good boy. It was, a childish conception. That's what it meant to be Christian. You just be a good boy. And I thought what that meant was good things happen to good boys. But when, our family dissolved when I was 15, and again, it was just a confluence. At that time, I was the head chorister of the choir, and I had not expected that. And so many lessons came out of that about serving, about politics, about leadership, all sorts of profoundly influential things upon me. And I'm like saying to God, I haven't really talked about this for a while, so sorry. I'll slow down. Hang on a second. My family's dissolving. I thought good things happen if you're a good boy, that was shattering.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know why, because I used to walk around alone in Melbourne between Sunday services. And for some reason, I just had a profound sense of God's presence. Now, that's nothing special about me. I'm sure it was this swirl of things that was happening. But I would walk around and just be, you probably know Melbourne, right?
A little, yeah.
Yeah. This was sort of before, I don't know, massive
Before it
commercialization.
became the cafe scene.
Yeah. So it was easy to walk around the street and it was totally different. And I just remember having this sense. But I don't know what happened. I sort of had to sort of remove myself away from this idea that being a good boy means good things happen. So I thought in a stupid kind of way, well, that means I need to become a bad boy because obviously it makes no difference. And I did what would be considered to be pretty tame bad things like smoking marijuana and getting drunk and these sorts of things,
Oh,
purposely
yeah.
being bad.
I was way over the top with that stuff. Yeah.
Right,
But it's
right.
a self-destruction. The impulse is self-destructive. Yeah.
Mm. Well, I know I'm going on at length, so I'll summarize it quickly. But basically, it's not like that connection to God ever went away. It was more just testing to sort of say, what's the reality of that thing, And I've tried being good, I've tried being bad. So clearly, it's nothing to do with that. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it's what you were talking about, direct revelation, direct experience, excuse me. So I also went through that period when I was 19, 20, 21, looking around at different things, Hinduism, Mormonism, um, whatever it was that was going to meet that. And I should add that the effect on my soul, on my spirit of doing bad things was I had a very strong sense of being weighed down by chains. The more I got into it, there was a very strong sense of that kind of I'm going downwards spiritually. Now, that's obviously metaphorical and all of that sort of stuff, but that when you're in the middle of it and you sort of walking around going, no one gives a shit about me, that metaphorical sense or that intuition, whatever you want to call it, is what you're going through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so in any case, I was looking, Alexandra, for what it was that would save me. Now, I'm not sort of being clever there and using Christian language. I
No.
really was sort of saying, look, I know suicide's not for me. I've thought about it. And it was sort of like the lowest rung and I was close to it, but I'm like, I know that's not it. I can't do it. And so I was just looking with spiritual eyes to sort of say, how can I get out of this? And look, one thing led to another. And I saw a look in one of my friend's eyes when he sort of said, look, I'm going to this church and you should come along. He was doing marijuana with me and getting wasted every weekend, but I saw that look in his eyes. I'm like, okay, something's going on there. That's the long way of starting to talk about it.
Yeah. It's very has many parallels for sure. And
Mm,
um just having gotten into environmental activism age 15 or so, and
mm,
um just not understanding the destructive shadow part of humanity. Just reading in history about the Second World War, and the gulags, and
mm,
what the extraordinary suffering of
mm,
people, both self-inflicted and inflicted upon others, and just general chaoticness in life, where a famine can devastate a population, or a disease, as much as and just that deep existentialism.
mm.
And yeah, that which ties into a personal level of abandonment, and which I certainly can relate to, with a very difficult family. Um,
Well, one of the things you have sort of shared, I hope it's all right to talk about this, but that your sort of forebears are Russian,
Mm,
and my maternal side is Czechoslovakian.
mm,
And so the ravages of communism and my mum's from Jewish family, so the Holocaust as well, are all too real from that perspective. And I don't know if you're alluding to that a little bit with your
um,
answer.
well, the direct trauma that I experienced can certainly be traced to all of that historical trauma and
Right.
um, uh, global trauma. And now, aged 51, I'm still mapping out the meanings and inquiring constantly into that um, existential question, and the question of suffering, and the question of good and evil, and
Right.
what it means to embody a separate human individual and yet constantly feel the connectedness and the
Mm.
need for transcendence.
Okay, this is very interesting. Um, the reason, okay, I'm pausing because I want to be careful, but the degree to which we're emotionally invested with not just our family, but the local community and the global community, the degree to which we're invested in that has profound impacts on our psyche.
Mm.
And clearly, going back to McLuhan, that you remember this in the 80s. I've said this before, but you watch Band Aid or
Right. Yeah.
We Are the World, and then all of a sudden you're caring about people on the other side of the world from a very basic sense in your soul.
Mm.
Well, clearly this is right. We need to give money, and this is a moral thing to do, and we dispose ourselves to a direction which is virtual, which we think has implications on a connected global community somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I worry about that. I actually worry about the effect it has on people individually by being so concerned about um, real concerns somewhere else, but that have only come into one's cognition through media reports or this and that. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know.
I
Yeah.
think growing up in the 80s, the Cold War was still very fierce for us as young teenagers, and I remember sitting in a practice room at music school with my mates, and we weren't talking about if the bombs were dropping. We were making plans for when the bombs were dropping. And
Wow.
somebody said, "Oh, my brother's got a shotgun. We'll take that." And somebody else said, "Well, we should, barrels of water will be necessary." Like it was tangible. Um, the existential nuclear crisis, the existential environmental crisis, and then
Mm.
my journey through to activism, and then feeling like nothing one individual can say or do can genuinely change this crisis or
Mm.
these crises.
Okay. Right, right.
And then having my child and suddenly being grounded in that realm of the young child, and
Mm.
needing the direct community around me to support raising him, and the it was really clear at that point that making change could only come from within, and then think global, act local, became my mantra, really.
Okay. Yeah.
And Buddhism really supported that for me.
Mm. Good.
So when you practice now,
Mm.
what what's your way
Mm.
into those connective states?
What had happened with me was because of this connection with the cathedral, I got a scholarship to go to a private school. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to go. I don't think money was. And it was very clear, as I was saying, like one of the trends, this is the late 80s now, that was happening in the West was neoliberalism. So, I sort of did witness, again, from this position of contrasts. I am going to get to your question, but I have to couch it in that propositional milieu, in the sense that I witnessed these contrasts of sort of profound matters of the soul and the spirit in the cathedral, discussed in whatever way, but most profoundly in music. And then what was happening with my peers in the school, and it was just all about business, even from the teachers down, and the school was run like a business. And I think John Vervaeke talks about how, there is this gap, like, previously, if you wanted wisdom, you'd go to the monastery or something. And if you wanted learning, you'd go to the university. But, I think he sort of says, well, where do you go for wisdom now? And I think, that's completely right. And so I sort of felt out of place in that kind of everything's about business. It's not that I don't care about business. It's nothing to do with that. It's just, if everything is about business, that is incredibly hollow. Yeah. And I was just like, I don't fit into that framework. It has no motivating power for me at all. So I don't know what the alternative is. But, the idea is you go to school, you're meant to be, the way I can only describe it is, the more books you read, the smarter you are. And that's measured by a test at a certain point in time, regardless of what's going on with you personally. And that, to me, just sort of, with everything I was going through, my own problems, it was overwhelming. I couldn't take it. It's like, well, I'd rather be sort of considered an idiot, but going my own, not an idiot, but just not smart, but going my own way, because I've tried it that way, and maybe I've achieved a few things academically or whatever else, and get this prize or that recognition, blah, blah, blah. And it was just obvious to me that it made me more empty spiritually, when I achieved something. And that was a strange place to be. It's like, well, I don't belong in this setup, in this society. What's wrong with me? So, a long story short, going back to direct experience, I found Christianity to be conformist and boring. There's a number of stereotypes, any of which anybody can reel off any day of the week, but those are probably the bulk of the images. But I actually got to a stage, it's like, well, if that's what it is, but, I had met someone who sort of said, well, it's also about healing. I'm like, I need some of that. I will take some of that. And this was a sort of very interesting guy who came from a capitalist family, had become a communist, preaching outside of churches against Christianity as a communist. Very interesting guy. But he said something and demonstrated something to me about his message, which was that Christianity was actually about freedom.
Yeah.
And going back to what I said earlier, my sense was of being in chains, going downwards in my soul. I'm like, well, I need what you've got. If I have to kind of do this action of faith in order to get what you've got, I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to give it a go. But I'm going to do so in that kind of very skeptical way. To the point, though, ultimately, what happened was there was a wave of change moving through the kinds of churches you see in Australia, which are kind of suburban and full of families and that sort of things, those sorts of things, you know, everyday kind of people doing the traditions of church. There was a wave of things happening which was called the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And that's sort of broadly now categorized as Pentecostalism or charismatic, that sort of thing. Mm. So I got into that and had an experience where, again, out of desperation, I'll get emotional, but out of desperation, I said, look, even if I look silly, I need to transcend those frameworks from where I came. I need to transcend the informal mystical transcendence that comes from song. I need to transcend the rigid structurality of neoliberal society and its testing and its constraints to box you in. I need to transcend my ignorance about good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, and I have no idea how to do it. And I had an experience which was at a church service, somebody prayed for me, the pastor, and I fell over and I started speaking in tongues. There's no other way to put this. Sure. Now, I'll give you the experience. It was like all of those incredibly mental sort of imprisonments. I had a very clear image of a laser going from my mind up into heaven, into the clouds, and I was I was connecting directly with God, and the incredible tension, which is neurosis, from being just so overly mental, was transcended. Now, later on, that was able to be made intelligible me more through Ken Wilber than anybody else, where he was talking about there's a difference between religion being irrational, which is how new atheists would position it, and being rational, which is how I think the sort of the theology of the church had ended up, along with every other social institution, and what he called transrational. We're looking for those transrational experiences in order to transcend. So that was my first experience of a transrational connection with the spiritual. And that's basically been the fundament since then. Sorry, I'm going on so long here.
Can I no, that's great. It's wonderful. I'm so I feel really privileged to hear your story. I was interested to watch your hands as you were speaking, and you made these cages out of your hands when you were talking, and then you brought them in towards your heart when you made them personal, and then they liberated like this. It was really beautiful.
Wow.
And that's very. It really is similar to the experience of Buddhism in some ways. I mean, I haven't fallen off the meditation cushion and spoken in tongues,
Yeah.
although I've seen plenty of that sort of thing within shamanism. But
Yes.
but first of all, the whole framework of Buddhism is to address suffering, and the whole purpose is to find freedom, which
Ah.
is completely parallel as far as I can tell. And then there's this concept of there's two aspects of your meditative practice. There's vipassana,
Mhm.
which is insight, and then there's samatha, which is peace,
Mm.
um, loosely translated. So because I'm such a trapped in my head and analytical person,
Mm.
I've focused on the samatha,
Mhm.
um, because the vipassana, like the intellectualism and reading the suttas and discussing and hearing teachers speak and all of those things, I have quite a lot of those kind of insights and theoretical frameworks and but until you actually
Mm.
go into an embodiment of things like compassion and things like loving kindness, which has been my major practice, um,
Mm.
you the insights don't bear the fruits,
Okay.
and I was really interested in how it came to a point for you where it was such an embodied spirit. It was, we've spoken a little bit before, just privately, about that.
Mm.
That's almost a universal concept of cleaning yourself out to embody the spirit or the divine, or to allow life to live through you rather than imposing your narcissistic will to control. And when you go into an experience, I'm sure I haven't experienced that kind of Pentecostal, although going to a black gospel church gave me that
Right.
kind of upliftment, like, yes, this is my kind of Christianity. If I was going to be a
Sure.
Christian, that's the way I'd go.
Yes.
And because it is so embodied and joyful and celebratory and extraordinary. But
Mm.
yeah, so how does that translate into
Mm.
how you practice daily with prayer?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I did want to add, and
Mm,
you're so good at this. You're so good at sort of evoking, Alexander. I think you're really great that way. Um, I should say that, when I made my commitment, it was thoroughly unemotional and it was thoroughly
mm,
rational. And it
mm,
was it was then followed by sort of months of, as they say in Christianity, seeking and knocking.
yeah.
So there was a lot of that. Again, I was just at that stage where it's like, I have nothing to lose. I've made my choice. I'm at rock bottom. All I've got is, and again, I'm escaping the fish pond of a thoroughly secular and atheistic worldview. Um, you're swimming in it, and so I suppose what was really happening was a jump towards saying, you know what, that actually is kind of insane. It makes me insane, and if I'm the insane one for believing in a God or something like that, well, I feel more sane by acknowledging that. So I'm going to keep going down that path.
Totally, totally. I mean,
Yes.
I my whole life can be viewed as crazy teenager takes drugs, reads Nietzsche and Sartre, goes off the rails, attempts suicide, falls pregnant, makes a mess. You know,
Mm,
that can
mm,
be how my life's read. I don't read it
mm,
that way.
mm.
You know,
Yeah, I see what you mean. I do.
that's somebody else's problem if they think that. You know.
Yeah. Yes, I do. I can't help but just keep going back to that your artistic spirit. It's just right out there at the very edge. That's my impression. I don't get any other impression than that.
Struan is constantly teasing me for my 110% openness in my big five traits.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, that kind of experience with, being open at least to the, apparently irrational experience of knocking down and babbling in sort of tongues and whatever else, that was scary and sort of off-putting to me. But it's like, you know what? It's almost as if, my whole soul was like fighting against embracing the dimension of reality that all of this stuff encompasses. And so, yeah, after that, I was like, that's what I needed, to get into that, to use Wilbur's thing, transrational place. And again, I mean, I'll give you an image that I had. I joined up with the church group. It was just basically, it was really great. There's no building. We met in houses. Someone put me up in their house, which to me was so something I respected greatly. Jesus talks about that.
It's hard opening.
Someone comes to your door and they don't have clothes, and Jesus is saying, I expect you to give them clothes. And here was someone doing that for me. I'll never forget that. Yeah. But the church group, was filled with, people who were addicted to heroin, rape victims, gay people, hardcore Christians. It was great. It was just so great. And what was special about that for me was like, the rule is just be the way you are, point yourself at God in that kind of generalized, messy way that you are, and, come on back. And there's something beautiful and creative about that. And I think it also reaffirmed to me, Alexandra, that picture of Jesus that I want to believe, which is
the one with the lepers and the one with
that's well said. That's well said.
The one with the lame and the sick, and what John talks about as the way agape can create a person.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah.
Which is really interesting to me because it's kind I'm not sure which metaphor of direction I should point in, but Buddhism has this training to divest yourself of the self, and
yes.
the whole sort of direction of non-dual teachings is that is to lose identification with our own narcissistic labeling and so a lot of practices to do that, and yet once you get to a place of shedding those layers of self and genuinely experiencing the totality of interconnectedness of all life, all beings, it comes to the same place, I feel, as the investment of personhood.
I love where we're going with this, because it really touches on the most important things. One of them is in that period, of sort of a completely rationalistic choice, followed by searching, seeking, then an experience, and so on. It was also reading the scriptures and that sort of thing. And I had a revelation eventually about just how wrong I was. That was incredibly important.
Yeah. Totally relate.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that's always been the starting point after that aspect, you know, not to be clever, but really what it came down to was Paul, the apostle, in writing a letter to one of the churches, what you see in the New Testament, he was saying something like, in my weakness, he is strong. And I've never let go of that. When I actually, and again, there was another picture that was associated with that, which is like, like the heliocentric shift, you know, the move away from the earth is at the center of everything. And then we realize, well, actually, no, the sun is at the center of everything. It was that kind of thing where I could see, well, okay, right. I am 99.9995 whatever percent wrong most of the time. And on the occasions where I'm right, it's not exactly me. You see where I'm saying? Yeah. That was that, and obviously that's what we're talking about in this community about wisdom. You know, again, in the scripture, what's the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, or I don't know how you would say it in Theravada, but I don't know. What's your experience of insight that way?
So in my main practice, which is metta, which means loving kindness, so it's a practice where you quiet the mind and then wish happiness, peace, well-being for all beings. And
Yes.
the stages of it traditionally start with loving kindness for oneself, and then loving kindness for a loved one.
Yes.
Then loving kindness for a stranger or someone with neutral emotional valence. And then loving kindness towards an enemy or someone who's wronged you, someone with negative emotional valence. And then once you can do that, then you can spread it out to all beings in the entire universe.
Yes.
And interestingly, my teacher is a Western monk trained in Thailand, but you know, I really connected with him because he speaks English, he can articulate clearly. He's also very scholarly, and his approach to early Buddhist texts and things is rigorous and scholarly, which appeals to my intellectual part. But his main practice is metta, and the way he teaches it, he's reversed it because Westerners struggle so much with loving kindness towards the self that we actually have to start with loving kindness towards another. And then once we open that up to the whole world, then we can recognize, hang on a sec, I'm just one sentient being part of this entire world. Of course I deserve love and kindness and compassion and joy equally. And for someone as me, who through what we were talking through the self-loathing induced by difficult traumatic childhoods, by you know, generational traumas, etc., and who was very sensitive to the pain and suffering in the world, and the destructiveness of our species, or the
Mm-hmm.
capabilities of humanity, you know, that way around was probably the only way into my own heart space,
Mm.
you know.
Yes, I do.
And now, you know, I practice as a suicide crisis counselor once a week, and that's become a compassion practice. And my interaction with my son attempts to embody all of those aspects, and you know, it's seeped out into life.
Mm.
So that, combined with the understanding of um, the depth of connectedness, um, and some insights from deep meditative practice and from psychedelic practice, and you know, a variety of things that I've
Mm-hmm.
done. I think that the egoic identification
Mm.
is gradually lessening. Um, and I find that when, you know, if you're improvising musically, or
Mm-hmm.
if you're facilitating a ceremony, um, and even in conversation, and I think what the practice of Dialogos is attempting to do is to get out of the way,
Mm.
out of the way. And whether you consider that's embodiment of the divine or a spirit, or whether it's
Mm-hmm.
conceptually an opening of the heart space, or whether you know, language kind of becomes irrelevant. And if you can get out of the way and let things through,
Mm.
then the potential for insight, and the potential for growth and transcendence, and I
Mm.
think I think there's a lot to that potential for social change. And I, I mean, certainly
Yeah.
it's for me a much nicer person to hang around, you know.
Well, like you said, I mean, think global, act local. You can't get more local than somehow overcoming the self.
Yeah.
But I suppose, you know, going back to that sort of direct connectedness things, I am reminded about my mentor, and it was just so important to have this mentor for me, by the way, like so
Yeah.
important. It was life and
100%.
death.
Yeah.
But he made a really big point about how unimportant to God your religion is.
Yes. Yes.
So he used to like to quote from the Old Testament, where through one of the prophets, God says, your righteousness, it might have been Isaiah, your righteousness is as filthy rags to me, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I keep hearing this song as we're talking, where there's a Christian guy and he's singing, and he's sort of rebuking at the same time as loving. And he's saying, it's not your religion, it's his love. And it goes some way towards what you're saying, but I think the point is there's a trap where, you know, definitely for Christians, you know, we're, you know, surprisingly, we're human beings, and we're competitive with each other, and we measure ourselves against each other, and we want to be like each other, and, you know, shock, horror, amazing. We're not like,
What,
and
all
it's
our
sort of,
human shit just comes in on top of anything that we do. It's like,
right. But maybe more in that shadow way that you're talking about. It's like,
yeah.
when it slips into that kind of thing, you know, let's say contrasting with the gospel church that you're talking about, I do kind of believe, and this might be controversial, there's an element of irrelevance to that, which is it's sort of okay, fine. But when you are seeking, Capello and I talk about this, and I think it's something I connect with him about, is that clearly with shamanic practice, what you're doing is getting in touch with the spiritual directly. And you're not effing about with too much head stuff. You are saying, look, I'm engaging directly with the spiritual realm here. I am activating my senses towards that direction. You know how you were saying before, like, what direction do I point? For me, it's very clearly faith is in this direction. But it can only be activated through that kind of, oh my gosh, I need to break some omelets to make this egg. I need to stuff this up. And there has to be creative spaces to allow that to happen, which is why I liked that church so much. And to be honest, it's why I like talking with you and Capello and other people who, it is the same thing. Whatever your religion is, as I say, again, this will be controversial. I do agree with John when he says he wants to reinvent the word religio to mean connectedness. It does come from the Latin word ligare, which means to bind. Yep. So it is about the way you connect both to spirit and to other people and so on. But I'm very conscious, I think, of Christianese. Okay, we all talk in a certain way. We're kind of a tribe, and okay, actually, it's okay. You want to fit in, no problem. That's cool. But if you're missing out on life, if you're missing out on a transformation with, I don't know what you would call it in Theravada, and I'm sorry, but whatever it is that elevates and transcends, there's something crucially important about that. What do you think about that?
Whatever elevates and transcends, meaning an equivalent language for soul.
I mean, God. I'll be completely honest with you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this is a very sort of only in the last 6 years or so since I had really direct experiential understanding, insight to the idea of emptiness.
Yes.
And I seem to be speaking. I didn't speak to anybody except my best friend, who's a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. I didn't speak about it for years because it was just. I mean, I was in the jungle. I didn't have the. I can barely speak about it in English, let alone in Spanish, to my teacher. But this first time and subsequent times through very profound meditative states, the experience of complete dissolution of subjectivity.
Yes.
Which is as close as I can find words. I mean, it's bandied around popularly as ego death, but ego death's not quite far enough, because when you go to that point of feeling free of the ego, there is still some awareness that can retrieve the experience as a memory and speak about it, whereas this experience is truly ineffable. And the fact that it's described as emptiness, it's so difficult. The best sort of concept I can stick on it somehow is, if you consider what was before the Big Bang and the experience of the Big Bang and the chain of being that leads to this individuated, embodied sense of self.
Mhm.
If you can, after being in that pre-Big Bangness, um, something started to sort of scintillate in this no-thingness that was everythingness's potential. And it started shimmering, and so I was aware that my awareness had returned. And then it was like whoosh, and the whole of consciousness and God was there, and um,
Mm.
the universe was
Okay.
created.
Yes.
Um, so I kind of understood that the potentiality of no thingness,
Mm.
emptiness, the potentiality of that is the creative impulse that I assume people talk about as God.
Mm.
And then the totality of experience created, and the depth of compassion that generated,
Mm.
um, where every earthworm is your grandmother, where every atom has been a part of you at some point in the how many billion years the universe has been around, like
Right.
the the understanding that everything is utterly interconnected and process driven. So um, I don't know how that relates to a theist's perspective,
Yeah.
really, and that's one thing I'm really interested to explore with you, probably in future conversations, because I have small violinists arriving shortly.
All
Um,
right. Let
but
me wrap it up
but
quick. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
just to finish that thought,
Mm. Mm.
the when you then you suddenly this self that identifies with itself, and this ego, this individuation, and the forgetfulness of the connectedness,
Mm.
that's what I understand as the fall.
Mm. Yes. Yes.
I because I haven't studied biblical texts particularly, but my understanding of Christianity is essentially through art and music,
Yes. Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than direct scholarship. So I apologise if these analogies are not right.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that experience of separation, that deep experience of separation,
Mm.
I think is generates suffering and generates the fact that we could possibly harm another being. And I mean, it's inevitable. Like, if I get sick, I'm going to take an antibiotic, despite the fact that those bacterium are living beings. But I'm sorry, it's kind of, if there's a funnel web in my son's bedroom, I'm going to squish it. I'm sorry, funnel web, it's me or you, kind of thing.
Yes. Absolutely.
So we all create those moments, or we interact with those moments, but the essential separation has now vanished through my practice and experience. And I suspect that is a similar thing that you're
Mm.
describing about God.
I'm really grateful that you shared that. And I got a very clear picture, which I had to put into a word. And I think what you're doing is really helpful, which is you're showing, I think, what a cosmic awareness is. Now, that sounds hippy dippy to a lot of people, but in my view, I think that kind of easy way of distancing ourselves from the magnificence of the kind of connection that you're talking about, which I just can only describe it as a cosmic thing, I do believe that that's what, say, Paul the Apostle was talking about when he's getting taken up into the third heaven, for example. But we just don't have language for it. So I am really grateful for you for sharing that. Grateful to you for sharing that. And I know you got to go, and it looks like I was right to allow extra time.
Yeah. Jules, we could go on for a long time.
Yeah. Well,
And I'd love to go further at some point when we both have time and space and emotional stability and so on. Yeah.
I would too. And I just really want to acknowledge your just generosity of spirit. It is very special. I think you're special. In general. I'm really glad that you are around, and yeah, thank you for making time.
It's totally mutual. This is the fan club of two here. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Now
All
I've
right,
got
so
to
I'll stop
go
the
listen to
recording.
Allegri's Miserere.
Let me stop the recording and
Okay.
hang on.